Said it's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo, and this is the World of Info. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and today we are having a very special guest, somebody who really has great interest, and her profession is driving her to do a very important national role. Professor Mary Misek, the professor of Coptic art and archaeology in the Faculty of Tourism and Hotel Management, and also at the same time Secretary General of the ICOM Egypt, which is the International Council of Museums of Egypt. And yes, she's going to tell us all about the Egyptian museums and all about the myth that Egyptian museums are not up to the standard to keep the trophies that are hidden in museums all over the world. Every museum in the world has an Egyptian collection that always attract visitors from all over the world, whether this is the British Museum or the Louvre in France, or even museums in Holland, in Berlin, in United States of America, the Metropolitan, and other museums, the Chicago Museum, Institute of Art. All these museums have huge collections of Egyptian antiquities, and the Egyptian antiquities are of different stages. We have Pharaonic Egypt, we have Greco-Roman period, we have the Coptic period, we have the Islamic period, and we have the contemporary art. All of this are scattered all over the world, and it's now time for us to understand how far can Egypt save its trophies outside. How legal is it for Egypt to ask the return of some of the very important pieces? And at the same time, how far are Egyptian museums faring in the international standard of the world? And definitely, it's very important. And Professor Mary Misek, really, it's very interesting, and thank you very much for giving us the time to come to our program and share with our listeners the important task that you are carrying on your shoulders.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Amr. It's an honor for me to be with you in your show. Thank you very much.
It's really very kind of you to tell us and share with us your experience, and to share with our listeners food for thought, because Egyptian museums have been there for quite a long time. If we talk about the Coptic art, because this is your specialty, we have to talk about how far Egyptian Coptic art is so unique. It is the only art that has never had a patron. It comes from the people to the people. It's people's art. It's made by very religious artists who are not professionals, but they are carrying faith in themselves, and therefore having magnificent churches built, magnificent artifacts given, and icons that are not present anywhere in the world with this sort of primitive art, and at the same time full of religious motives. Whether this was from the 1st century or up till the 21st century, still we can see how the Coptic artists are doing a huge job. Tell us about what is unique about Coptic art.
Exactly what you've kindly mentioned, dear Professor. So, talking about Coptic art and Egypt, this is something of outstanding value, and it's a reflection about not just the art and the culture, but even has a layer, a deeper meaning about the monastic life, about the church life, about the social life, the life of the Copts, their daily life, their practices, and also diving deep into the monastic life and the life of the monk, even through his hermitage, his cell, what he's doing, how he is living. He is praying in front of a niche, and as you've kindly also mentioned, all this art, they were executed by either the monks itself, so we don't have professional artists. And this is the beauty and the power of this Coptic art. As you've mentioned, it's so simple, but we have the contrast. It is powerful because of its deep spiritual meaning. At the same time, the natural beauty without any exaggeration and the reflection. As you see, for example, we have even this extended to Coptic architecture as well. We find the churches and the monasteries very simple from outside, comparable to other churches and monasteries in Rome and in all over the world. You can see how modest, but when you enter the church, you can't imagine the beauty of its mural painting, the layers, the stories, the iconographical programs, and even the different sources of inspiration for the artist or the monk.
Definitely, because the monks system or the monasterial system is something which is very unique, has been introduced in Christianity by the Egyptian early Christians as far as the second or the third century, when we can see very important monks who started the monasterial movement, whether this is San Antonio or Pola, and especially San Pola, who was a unique man, a man who solitary, almost like a solitary life. He never shared his monk activities like San Antonius did in the Red Sea, and having a lot of students and pupils to follow him. And the role of San Antonio in the Nicaea Convention cannot be denied in 325 AD. So Egyptian Christianity has introduced a lot to the Christianity that we know today. And it was from 325 till 451 where Egyptian church was, or Egyptian Coptic church was considered to be one of the very eminent churches in the Christian movement as a whole. But of course, come Caledonian Convention, which is more or less a political convention than it is a religious one, that has put aside the pioneer work of the Egyptian church and condemned it as to be heretic sometimes, or extremely monophysist, while they are extremely, of course, biophysicists. So the art has been always the art of a church in minority, a church that people are trying to express themselves. And maybe because of that important point, that's what I want to discuss with you, is that since this art is not having its own patrons and it's just by humble people, the popes of Alexandria, the consecutive popes, didn't appreciate very much in the beginning how valuable is this art. So we know, for example, in the 19th century, when the church was in need of funds, they went to Morcos Semeca, who was the famous president of one of the very first president of the Coptic Council, and told him, we want to dissolve this beautiful gold and silver relays that we have by Egyptian monks, and we want them to sell them as silver and gold. And he said, no, stop, I'll get you money for the church, and keep this, and let's make a museum. Let's talk about the Coptic Museum, which is your specialty.
Okay, so as I've said, it's an honor always just remembering Mor Osameka Basha and the Coptic Museum, it has the uniqueness of it. It is the first museum built by an Egyptian, and the director was an Egyptian,
yes,
unlike the other museums. And also when we talk about monasticism, it's an Egyptian invention.
Yes.
And 1 century after the systematic foundation of monasticism, it started in the 4th century in Egypt, AD. In the 5th century, Egypt taught the West about monasticism and the rules of Saint Pachomius, Saint Shenouda. Because
Pachomius was the service monks,
yes,
which was followed by later on by the Franciscan and the Dominicans and the Jesuits.
Exactly.
They all followed the footsteps of Pachomius, and other ones like the solitary ones like Saint Shenouda. And Saint Shenouda is the one who introduced the female monasterial system,
yes,
right? So
yes. So as you see, we're talking about Coptic Egypt a lot, about monasticism and the museum. So when we talk about the Coptic Museum, it's totally, it's not because of my specialization, but when we talk about the Coptic Museum, it's the only museum in context. If you just visit Old Cairo district, you can find on one side the Hanging Church, on the other side the Greek Orthodox St. George cylindrical church there. And the museum, its uniqueness influenced, for example, the topic of our today, the Greco-Roman Museum, even in the display method. So the Greco-Roman Museum nowadays, when we start planning and rethinking about the exhibition, we were inspired by the Coptic Museum. The chronological way of exhibiting, or the thematic way, and even some of the objects we borrow it from the storages of the Coptic Museum as well. So the Coptic Museum reflects also, although we have a problem, as you've kindly mentioned, it is the Coptic art never gained the patronage or the privilege like the ancient Egyptian, the Islamic art, because of the rulers and the political situation that time. So we can see we have many problems, like the problem of documentation, problem of dating, and till now we're trying to work on them to find accurate dating. Despite this, it is one of the most beautiful museums, not only in Egypt but all over the world.
So I think it's one of the biggest Coptic museums.
Collection,
In the
that's right.
biggest Coptic collection is in the Coptic museum, like the Antique Khana or the Egyptian museum, the old Egyptian museum, which is the biggest collection of ancient Egyptian antiquities. When we talk about the museum, we have to give tribute also to Cyril V. That's the Pope at that time, who accepted with great liberal way of thinking, which I believe he inherited from Cyril IV, who was the father of modernization in the Coptic Christian Church. He agreed with Marcus Semeka, and they went hand in hand in collecting the valuable stuff from different monasteries, from different churches, and having a huge collection. So come Mary Misek in the 21st century, and she has her role in more, museum display in the Egyptian Coptic Museum. Tell us about how the museum has been perceived in the early 20th century, the late 19th century, and how we are trying to modernize this and making it, I know it's also on the map of a lot of tourists to visit, but it still needs more emphasis, and how we are doing this topic.
Okay, so thanks to the the initiative of His Excellency, the former Minister of Tourism and Antiquity, Professor Khalid Al-Anani, and his vision about museums and how to start, rethink about our museums, the main museums, and the vision about establishing new museums in every governorate in Egypt, reflecting the city, because museums, it's a mirror of the society, of the city itself. So he started, his idea to establish a committee. A committee headed by Professor Ali Omar Abdullah. He was the former president of Helwan University and professor of Greco-Roman art, and we regarded him as the maestro for managing this committee, and the members from the faculties of archaeology and in Ain Shams University, Cairo University, Helwan University, faculty of tourism, very well selected in the different domains. And this committee of Egyptians museum display scenario established in August 2019. And from that time on till now, till this moment, we're working non-stop on either building new museums and at the same time simultaneously the idea of not to forget our main museums. We call them like our backbone, the foundation for the new museums. So we started in August 2019 with new museum, which is the State Museum in Sohag.
Yes.
And this was our first museum that we started, followed by the museum in Tanta. And afterwards, in 2020, it was like the golden age. And this time, 2020, we were suffering. The whole world was staying still, being at home, because of the COVID.
Yes.
But on the contrary, we were in a race. And we started working on the Baron Palace, and it was inaugurated in April. Sharm el-Sheikh Museum, the Royal Chariot Museum, which is very close, and Kafr el-Sheikh Museum as well. And we were also very proud that in one day, and they were inaugurated on a presidential level, and in one day it never happened in Egyptian history, to the opening of 3 main new museums at the same time. And it was during COVID. So this is, it's a reflection about Egypt knowing the value of its artifacts and knowing what is a museum, how to display its artifacts, its heritage, either the tangible and the intangible, in a scientific way, attractive way, archaeological context, and at the same time we believe as a committee member that a museum, yes, it's very important for the tourist, because it's a convey, it's showing our artifacts to Egypt's guests. At the same time, the important role of a museum to its community. And we have the best example in Kafr el-Sheikh Museum, which is also recently inaugurated, and it is the biggest in the Delta. And this museum, actually, it is #1 visited by citizens from Kafr el-Sheikh, from the local inhabitants, in addition to the tourists as well. And the networking between Kafr el-Sheikh and the scenario of Buto, the site, Sacha, this blessed site visited by the Holy Family, and how the museum connected with Buto and with Sacha, the village of the Holy Family, marketing, our heritage in the different eras to the Egyptians at the same time, at the same level to the tourists as well.
So it's the Kafr Sheikh is not just Coptic as well. It has also Pharaonic, Islamic Pharaonic.
Yes.
Because of course, because of the delta and the fertility of the soil, a lot of Egyptian artifacts, especially the Pharaonic Egyptian artifact, has been eaten up by environmental conditions as we go. But sometimes it's a great chance that a lot of antiquities are discovered by chance or by planning of these areas, especially in the Sharqiya Governorate and in nearby Kafr Sheikh, where you can find a lot of temples and remnants of temples in this area. Especially also we can consider from the Matariya eastward as we go. So all these temples and structures put us on the important way that it is a policy of the government, not just the policy of the minister. So, for example, when Dr. Khalid has changed his career now, going to be one of our, hopefully, the nominee for Egyptian, the Egyptian nominee for the UNESCO directorship, Mr. Ahmed Isa, the current ambassador, is fulfilling the same role. He's putting the committee under his authority. He's giving you full range of movement so that you go on and do more.
Of course.
Not inhibiting, but going on. So this is sort of a step-by-step movement, can really help as the famous stability sign of Pharaonic Egypt, where you can say that what is good about Egypt is the stability. So this is very important, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's why, we started, as I've mentioned, in 2019 until now, and we're continuing the same committee, with some minor amendments under the leadership of His Excellency Dr.
Ahmed Isa.
Ahmed Isa, of course.
So when we go on and we practice more, we find that there is a famous, unfortunate myth that is going around. The semi-cultured people, let's call them by their names, because these are semi-cultured people who think that they know much. Sometimes part of the problem of intelligent people is that they do sometimes stupid thinking. And this happens when, for example, you're an engineer or a doctor, and you think that you can easily, if you read a book about antiquity, then you can become a master in it. And vice versa. And of course, the whole world is full of a lot of physicians, especially with the internet. Everybody comes to me in my clinic, always think that he knows better. So if this is in medicine, in life and death, so what happens in art is extremely very haphazard. So people would always say it's better to keep the monuments where they are in Europe and the States, because they are better shown there, and they are really very well designed museums, and the good illumination and the good protection. And look what the Egyptians are doing to their antiquities. They are not doing a good job. And this, I want to assure our listeners, is completely a myth, because the Egyptian Museum has been there since Merit Basha and Maspero later on. We can see how they tried to protect and include a lot of artifacts, and what is on exhibition is much less than what is in the stores of Egyptian museums. And it was the movement that was done later to build more museums, to remove a lot of monuments from this artifacts from the stores into the new museums. So how far is this myth true?
Yes, this is this is, and the idea behind building the museum, it is what you've kindly mentioned, because we have a lot in the storages, and we're not emptying museums to build a new museum. No, we're using what we have in the storages, and trying to show the people, to show the world, the community, and what we have a lot. And that's why it's very important. And if you just see, for example, I'm going to give you just a small example. It's one of the museums which is considered one of the most beautiful museums, which is the Royal Chariot Museum.
Yes.
Just visiting the museum, you will just, it is beautifully, the objects very well represented, the narrative inside it, the timeline, the storyline, and you can see how the objects were conserved by Egyptian conservators. And this is an answer to the people who they were accusing the Egyptians of not dealing properly with their artifacts, the neglection of the museum. The museum, they are not very well. Just to have a look, to see how the Egyptians conserve artifacts, how they were we are all Egyptians working together, how they were shown, and even you can see the feedback of the tourists. They said they were at some point they were astonished. So Egyptians, they do it, and even they for example, when we are transferring an object even to the gem, to the Grand Egyptian Museum, some of the Egyptian conservators, they realize that Howard Carter, the one who excavated the tomb of Tutankhamun, he was, for example, in his reports, he mentioned that this piece belongs to this, and he named it, and he gave a description. Our Egyptian conservator, no, they said, no, it's not accurate, and they made the amendments, and they refixed the object, and they displayed in its accurate new form. So this is what shows their power and their dedication towards how the care for their artifacts and how to show it.
And of course, we have to mention, since we are bringing up Tutankhamun, Howard Carter and Cardinal Fohn are not as innocent as they are looking in the books of history or on the pages of the internet. Actually, when they were deceased, a lot of Egyptian artifacts were found in their homes, and later on, part of their families or their grandchildren are starting to put this in exhibition and on sale in famous bidding places all over the world. So this gives you an idea that keeping these artifacts in well-documented places and well displayed definitely is very important. I always can remember that an old museum like now it's considered to be old, Luxor Museum, which has been there for almost 20 years, and the Hurghada Museum, which is almost 5 or 6 years back. All these can put us into on the map of Egyptian museums all over Egypt. So let me make things clear for our listeners. Most of these museums are covering all the periods of Egyptian history.
Exactly.
Not just Coptic, not just Pharaonic, but Coptic, Pharaonic, Islamic, and Greco-Roman, right?
Exactly. So, for example, even for another example, we have Sharm el-Sheikh Museum. It's reflecting the wildlife of Sharm el-Sheikh, in addition to but through the Greco-Roman, through the ancient Egyptian, and we have modern and contemporary art. Now, what also we're working on is Kom Oshim Museum, and we want to reflect the crafts in Fayoum, and to tell the story of Fayoum, even about the palaces and the ancient palaces that we have, heritage buildings. There is the palace of Alexan Pasha in Asyut. So we have the plan of transferring the basement of the palace into a museum, telling the story of Asyut, the civilization of Asyut throughout the ages.
And Alexan Pasha was Armenian, right? Well, this shows how Armenians and Armenian Egyptians are very much Egyptians, and they are taking a role in the country and in the knitting of the country. Different people who are coming, because Egypt has been always a melting pot, where Armenians, Greek origins, Islamic origins, Arabs, or whatever, or Andalusian people, you can find them all amalgamated. And therefore, I always tell my patients whenever they come, I can never classify you as white colored or as colored or dark colored, because Egyptians are mixed heritage. The only country in the world that has never seen discrimination according to the color of the skin of the people is here in Egypt. You can very easily see dark colored people married, men or women married to very fair colored males or females, depending on the opposite sex. And also we can see how people are, for example, the very famous two statues of an achondroplaskic gentleman with his normal wife sitting, and he was extremely rich and a noble man that he can afford something which belonged to even the old kingdom, the statues that we can see in the ancient Egyptian museum. So this gives us a range of ideas. about what are the true Egyptians. They are anyone who has been living in this grand land as the law of Egyptians since 1900. Then they are Egyptians.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Exactly. Right.
So when we talk about the Egyptian museums and about how fair they are, we have to talk also about a museum like we have had the pleasure of having Professor Ahmed Ghanem here to talk about his pet, his museum, and the Museum of the Civilization, the NEMEC, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. Definitely, what's nice about it is that it has bits and pieces from all the mosaic, the mosaic of Egyptian history and art. Tell us about your pet, your new pet, because this is the Greco-Roman. I had the chance to see the Greco-Roman before it was closed, the Greco-Roman temple in Alexandria. And it was a magnificent experience for me and the kids. This was back in 2004. They were then little, and the museum is beautiful. And it's just in Midtown Alexandria. Suddenly you can find it beside Cinema Metro or something, one of these cinemas. And suddenly you can find a huge area in the Midtown of magnificent structures. And then I heard that they're going to close it down and to do renovations. And I said, oh, then the problem is coming. Most probably these antiquities are going to be destroyed. The humidity of the weather will destroy them. Alexandria is famous for the humidity of its weather, and therefore these beautiful artifacts will be lost by time, and we are in jeopardy. And I was very sad for this period of time. And the museum went on renovations for quite a long time, and it was almost closed because of the revolution things. And suddenly you're telling me, and I met you a few weeks back, and you said that the Greco-Roman Museum is going to be open, and it's a new horizon of museum display. But you brought me a lot of good news. Tell us about the good news, please.
So, first of all, we're very happy and looking forward to the open. Most probably it will be open next fall. The work in the museum almost finished. So as you've mentioned, it closed in 2005. And at that time, I need to just mention Professor Mary Misek. She was the one in charge of the museum at that time, and she is in a very careful and scientific way, she was able to pack all the artifacts in boxes, and many other objects. They were stored in the storages in museums all over Egypt. So the packing from 2005 till 2008. And then we started working on the museum. So we were having the same, we were worried about the condition of the artifacts because of humidity and the salty weather. But when we opened the boxes, we realized that the objects were that professionally way packed. So we just take them from the boxes into the showcases and into the display hall. And this is thanks to Dr. Mary Misek, and we saved conservation money, retouching, and God forbid the loss of some of the object may be destroyed because of not unprofessional way of packing. But this is also one of the things that we were very grateful to her, and how she was able to pack all the pieces, and we have them.
She's a professor of Greco-Roman at Alexandria University.
And she was the head at that time in charge of the museum. So now the museum, it will be, in the past it was the space was 5,000 meters squares. Now it will be 9,500 meters square. So consists of the ground floor, then we have mezzanine, and then we have the first floor. So the objects will be, so it's a huge, you can see it's almost the double the size. Yes. It will be one of the biggest museum of the Greco-Roman in the Middle East, and I don't know such an example of the content of the scenario. For example, we'll have the chronological way. We'll start with pre-Alexander, starting from the 26th dynasty till Alexander. Then the Ptolemaic ruler, their daily daily life. And you know that it's considered for us a dark age because of the lack of documents. Because of the Library of Alexandria, we don't have documents reflecting the daily life. And this was one of the challenges, but we were able to show the daily life during the Ptolemaic era, and then the Roman rulers, their daily life, and to have some parts to shed the light on. Like, for example, the triclinium. We have like a reconstruction of the triclinium, which is the couches extended from the three sides where the Romans used to have their meal while they are reclining. So it's very interesting. And we have below it, we have a beautiful mosaico, and it is covered with glass. The visitors, they can come and walk on the glass to experience the beauty of the motifs and the technique of the mosaics, together with the Medusa, which is, very famous in the Roman, that it's the ugly face with the hair of a serpent, like an amulet. Anyone with bad intention turned into a stone. And we have a reconstruction of a Roman house. So I am telling, it's not just a museum of Greek and Roman. No, it's beyond that. So to see a model of a Roman house, this is something outstanding. To see the temple of Ras El Soda, which is the only private temple discovered so far of Isidorus. He was a charioteer, he fell from his chariot, he injured his leg, and then he made like a vow to goddess Isis. And we have this temple, it will be placed there. We have the religious life and the triad of Alexandria, Serapis, Isis, Hippocrates, and the Alexandrian cult, official cult. It will be display in detail. As you can see, it's not just to be, attracted with the beauty of the art. It is educational as well. It will change the map of tourism in Alexandria. And even we're talking about the idea, because of the weather and the nature of Alexandria, most of the tourists and the inhabitants go to the beaches in the morning. So we're discussing the idea to open it in the evening.
Yes.
So that the people, they can go, going to the cafes, have fun, and then they can visit the museums as well, learn and entertain. In the evening, it is more inspiring. And this is also thanks to the flexibility of the current minister, the government. We're all in the same boat, and they are all pushing forward. Whenever we have an initiative, we're just raised, and then we find the green light go, as long as it's for the benefit. So we find all the encouragement and the support of the government. Then we have the temple of the crocodile. We have the reconstruction using the original stone, and this is also for the first time it will be represented there. All this in the ground floor, the part of the intellectual life and the scientific life, the philosophers, so be like a source of inspiration about the culture and the science of Alexandria. In addition to the muses, they were the 7 gods of literature, art, culture. They were singing for the gods. So it's the beauty of the topic and the terms. It's very important to revive them. The athletes and the gymnasium as well will be very well represented there, to show, and even the famous figures, the famous athletes will be represented in the museum as well. We'll end up, because the display is chronological, with the afterlife. We'll have mummies, but we have something different. We have mummy labels, we have mummy shrouds, mummy masks, and we can see the mix.
We have portraits, of course.
Yes, of course. We have, and to show the mix. The Greeks, they came with civilization, and we have a strong and powerful civilization in the ancient Egypt. So this mix was very well represented in this area of the afterlife. And we'll end up with the late Roman part. Late Roman, which is the Byzantine.
Yes.
So instead of just putting a label about we're entering Christianity, we're using collection to orient the visitor in his flow inside the museum. We have a huge statue of Emperor Diocletian. And Diocletian, always we remember that 284, it is the era of the martyrs and the
because this is the year when Diocletian became the emperor, and it is the year where more inflicted killing and murdering of the early Christians, and it's the year of martyrs, and it's the year where the Coptic calendar starts, 284.
So we find it, and it's a very beautiful one, and I think it will be unique to have
beautiful statue of an ugly man.
Of an ugly man.
We have to say that, because this historically it might be a work of art, but it shows a ruthless man.
Yes, of course.
So when we talk about I really don't like the misnomer of Greco-Roman, because you cannot put the Greeks and the Romans in the same basket. And it should be the Greek period and the Roman period. And we know, of course, that the Greeks, in the beginning of their civilization, they have headed south towards Egypt. We know, for example, that Hippocrates has received his medical education in 450 when he came to Egypt in Memphis, which was one of the biggest medical schools at that time. We know, of course, that Alexander the Great has a very special emphasis. I mean, his father and the problem that happened between him and his father and his mother definitely ended up by the murder or the disappearance of his father from the theater, and the idea of having the military work of the Greek battalions, how the Greeks united we stay, departed we fall. So this how Alexander the Great, through this mythology of the Greek battalions, was able to reach India, and nothing stopped him except fate, or except his death, premature death at the age of 32. When we look at how the Greeks have been impressed by the Egyptian civilization, how they have shared the Egyptian civilization, and how Alexander the Great, and later on his general who inherited Egypt, that is Ptolemy I, has shown himself in the famous statues in the Egyptian Museum, the Old Egyptian Museum. One of him as a pharaoh, and the other as a Greek, as a Greek gentleman wearing the pharaoh's clothes. So, how much the ancient Egyptian has affected the Greek mythology and the Greek art?
Yeah, a lot, to a larger extent. For example, starting from god Serapis, and the Ptolemies, when they start to, to introduce, you want to get closer, Ptolemy the first, to the Egyptian, so he introduced god Serapis, mixture between. So this is the religion, the ancient Egyptian religion influence. And even in art, we have the Roman, the catacomb in Kom Shu'afa, where we can see how visibly the mixed iconography in the figures and in the details in art as well. The gods, for example, Isis Egyptian, our Egyptian goddess, she was represented in the Greco-Roman form. We have a lot of examples. So this shows it's not only in their daily life, but in the core of the Greeks. In the religion, they were influenced by ancient mummification. They built on. Yes, they have their own, methods, their own civilization, but they used the Egyptian as a foundation, and they were inspired with it. That's why the outcome, it's something, unbelievable. Until now, inspiring even modern, the life and the building of the churches, the building of, cities. We can see the Greeks, so till now, because of this mixture, of this influence.
And we can see something very interesting, because the Romans were very impressed by the Greek art and architecture and the Greek philosophy. And we can see Hadrian, the famous emperor, how much he was very influenced, especially with Isis, and his trip to Egypt, and his involvement with his boyfriend, if I may use the expression, and how he killed him and put him as a deity later on. All this have led the presence of Isis temples even in Paris region, where one of the temples of Isis, as the ambassador of France was here in our program, and attracted our attention that there was a temple of Isis that was discovered in Paris, but it was hidden on the spot, because this was during the Nazi regime, and therefore they couldn't find it later on, but it was reported and documented. So that's why they put sometimes the Roman beside the Greek, which I totally find it totally unjustified for the Greek art. So the nice thing that you were telling me just prior is that the last 4 dynasties are demonstrated in the Greco-Roman period, in the Greco-Roman Museum. Tell us about the artifacts there.
So it's sort of statues, for example, inscriptions. We have letters. We have almost three showcases about this era, because it's very important not to start with Alexander. So it's pre-Alexander. It's very important.
This is the period where Greeks started coming to Egypt to learn.
Yes, from the 26th dynasty onwards. And then we have the focus of Alexander, and then we started, and we divided the Greek into the first phase, the Roman into the first phase, and late Roman, and highlighting the important emperors. We have beautiful collection, and not only in Alexander. This is also, this museum will be one of the powerful Greco-Roman museums in the whole world. But we have also Greek and Roman collection all over Egypt as well. In Ashmonin, we have a lot. We have all over Egypt. But this is the main focus. This is the start to show the collection, and the majority of the collection, they were collected from Marsa Matruh, from Mariotis, Lake Mariotis, from the region, very close to Alexandria. But we have in every spot, we have many artifacts.
So after the break, we have to take a break now. But after the break, we'll continue with Professor Mary Misek, the professor of Coptic art and archaeology in the Faculty of Tourism and Hotel Management, about museum display, about the Greco-Roman museums, and about one of the most loved artifacts of the Egyptian Greek period or Greco-Roman period, and these are the Fayoum portraits. We have to give a mention of them because they carry a lot of mystique.
Yes.
Not just beauty, not just charm, not just sadness. It has a lot of things. So I believe we should give some time to these beautiful portraits. But after the break, stay tuned with us in Radio Cairo, in the world of info, and we are coming just after the break. So, still listening to the world of info, and today is really an important guest with us, Professor Mary Misek, the professor of Coptic art and archaeology in the Faculty of Tourism and Hotel Management, Helwani University, and we are talking about museum display, which is part of her postdoctoral work in Berlin Museum, and we have to talk about one of the best things that I always care to see in all the Egyptian sections in international museums. Whenever I go abroad, I would always like to search for the Fayoum portraits. And they are very touchy. And once I was telling my mentor, Professor Nasser Qubbi, who is, beside being an eminent professor of phoniatrics, he's also an eminent interested gentleman in culture in general and Egyptology and Islamic history. And I tell him these Fayoum portraits do not look very much Egyptians. And so, with very sarcastic way, he would always tell me, Amr, they are more Egyptian than you are. And yes, this is true. Tell us about the Fayoum portraits. I mean, there was always the idea of the Ka finding the place, the body, and that's why they do the mummification. Yes. And then because they are sure that the head will not stand the test of time, so they would put a mask for the head, like Tutankhamun mask, or the masks of the famous pharaohs, whether this was Thutmose III or whoever could be found. But in the Greco-Roman period, they started painting on wooden panels.
Yes.
And these wooden panels were sometimes drawn before death. And they would put, instead of putting a label on the house, they would put the portrait of the gentleman who owns the house. And then they would transfer it on the day of his death to his sarcophagus. And sometimes they would draw it after death. And that's why it carries these empty, sad eyes. What do you think of these?
Yes, exactly what you've mentioned. Yes, so they are developed from the ancient Egyptian, the idea of the Ka enters the tomb to identify the body if any damage happened to the face of the deceased. And it is continued, and we have the Fayoum portrait, and they are actually mummy portrait. But because they were discovered in Fayoum with large quantity, and that's why in Komoshim Museum, we'll dedicate a huge space to show the technique, not only just the portrait, but the story behind the technique, the artist, even the people, the jewelry, the dress, the hairstyle. So everything will be very well represented in Komoshim Museum because it is in Fayoum. But in the Greco-Roman Museum, yes, we have examples because it's always showing a reflection about the people. You can see their expressions. Sometimes they are very sad, sometimes they are, very stiff. So you can see even the different generations, from babies till old and ladies, and the power of the Fayoum portrait, besides its technique and how till now they were very well kept, it is the expression of their eyes.
Yes.
This is, and the details, the fine details, for example, of the earrings. And what is interesting when we were working, and this is the benefit. Yes, we're building museums, we're having new collection on display even for the first time, but the thing that we're on continuous discovery. So for example, we discover a collar or an earring for one of the Fayoum portraits that the lady was wearing in another storages. If we didn't have, these museums, we wouldn't able to discover and find this matching and bringing them together under one roof in a museum. So we have many stories regarding the Fayoum portraits. It's an important and an essential piece.
It's going to be bigger than the collection of the Fayoum portraits in the Egyptian museum, or it is smaller?
No, in the Greco-Roman museum, no, samples of
samples,
it. Yes. Because we want Kom Oshim, so they will be like, the leading objects there, because it's Kom Oshim. And so in the Egyptian, so as you mentioned, we have in the Egyptian museum, Greco-Roman, or in the Coptic museums, we have Fayoum portraits scattered all over. But the hub will be Kom Oshim Museum that we're working on, and we hope that will start soon.
The eyes are amazing, intriguing,
yes,
and asking, and the posture, yes,
colors.
And the colors are magnificent. And I believe the eyes are the work of the artist, because the artist has to imagine how the eyes used to look like, because the deceased has closed eyes. So the eyes are the work of the artist. It is amplifying the spirit of the artist.
The mirror of the soul.
Yes, so it's the spirit of the artist more than the spirit of the deceased himself or herself. And this is what makes it so intriguing, and this is what makes it unique. Whenever you go to any museum in the world, because of the huge amount that is being present all over, I've seen them in Moscow, I've seen them in Britain, I've seen them in the United States and in Paris, of course. All of these museums in Berlin, you can see the Fayoum portraits, and you have to stop and watch, and you just are mesmerized, really. Yes. Since we're talking about mesmerization, I really admire the fact that the Egyptian government has done in the airports, in Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, we have museums that are for free for the transit passengers and for the guests who are traveling or passing by Egypt to see for themselves a glimpse. Maybe we are attracting their attention. Why don't you spend a night or two in Egypt to see, right?
Yes, exactly.
Tell us about these museums. It's very hard. First of all, it has to be small, because the space is limited. And at the same time, it has to be concise and showing everything.
Yes.
How was that possible? And how can you show everything in just 20 minutes or something? That's how fast the tourists will pass.
Yeah, so this is the challenge, behind the display and that we're facing. First of all, we study the visitor and the psychology of the visitor, how you attract him first, and why he will visit, and we want him every time, whenever, to consider many visits.
Yes.
So in Terminal 2 and Terminal 3, we have this museum, which is something new, and people at the beginning, they said, how come we have a museum in the airport? But we did it, and it was a great success, and people from the feedback, we can see they loved a lot. And because of the museums in these terminals, when they want to come to Egypt and to see more, so
and
they start.
Do they have a shop selling
Yes,
genuine merchandise?
Yes, the merchandising that we have, and it is an Egyptian factory company, a
Yes.
huge one.
Yes.
Yes, and they are, they are doing replica and merchandising from the pieces, and this is also, it's very good,
Yes.
like taking home heritage and marketing for Egypt.
And books as well, right?
Books as well, and it's all all the merchandising all made in Egypt.
That's very
Yes,
good. It's
and
better
this is-
not to be
yes, of course.
built abroad.
Yes,
and
yes.
and the nice thing, which I really admire, is the fact that you'll have a chance to attract the attention of tourists.
Exactly.
Because, for example, in New York, in John Kennedy, you can see a shop for the Metropolitan Museum, which is, of course, a beautiful museum and lovely museum, and it has a lot of beauty inside. But definitely it attracts the attention of people to see and go, and then why don't you go yourself and see the Metropolitan? So this is a very right way of thinking. Another museum which has attracted my attention, and I believe it has a different motive, and that is Hurghada Museum.
Yes.
Everybody goes to Hurghada from north, east and west and south even, to enjoy the sea, to enjoy the sun, and you have decided to build a masterpiece of
Yes.
museums. And the antiquities have built a beautiful museum, and it has something unique about it. Tell us about it.
So the Hurghada Museum is the first PPP. It's the first private-public partnership that we have the museum, and its concept, it's the beauty. And it's because we know, because of the charters, so yeah, most of the tourists, they only come for 1 week to Hurghada, and they don't have the chance to come and explore Cairo, Alexandria. So this is the concept behind the museum. So we wanted to see like bits from every piece and to see beautiful, because it's a beautiful city, and it's a reflection of our beautiful civilization. And also it's a way of marketing to give a chance. Even the tourists who will come for 2-3 days or 1 week, it's also important way to learn from the culture, because it's not enough just to wait till he comes to Cairo or to Alexandria to explore the Greco-Roman Museum or to the ancient Egyptian. But it's very important every spot to get to know, and even for the people of Hurghada, it's important to get to know more about the beauty of the ancient Egyptian. And
so it has different periods, right?
yes,
Islamic, Coptic, ancient
thematic
Egyptian,
and chronological as well.
very nice. And I haven't seen it from the inside. It's quite big, right?
Yes.
And then come to another masterpiece, which is the new Capital Museum.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Yes, it's finished. It's Egypt's capital's museum in the new administrative capital, and it's finished but not inaugurated yet officially. It's a huge one with reflecting Egypt's capitals, not throughout the ancient Egyptian, and even ending up with Alexandria and Cairo and the administrative capital. So telling the story through our capitals.
So it goes from Memphis,
yes,
Thebes,
exactly,
and
Akhenaten, Fustat, Alexandria, and through Alexandria we show the Christian objects.
Yes, and so, even Qatar as well.
Qatar, all the famous capitals that have a role, and focusing on the administrators, the governors, the viziers,
yes,
because of the name and the concept of the museum, and also reflecting power and the beauty as well. So matching with the concept.
So does it have any Fayoum portraits?
No,
you go to the subject of beauty.
Flexible, yes, but it's flexible. So this is also what we have. It's the mentality that we have, the idea that we're not just placing the objects for good. And you are experiencing now the ancient Egypt, the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square. So we have rethinking the exhibition. We are working on re-exhibiting. So we have the possibility to create temporary exhibitions, to re-exhibit, to put, for example, Fayoum portraits. It depends, because not only the permanent exhibition, but we're working on temporary exhibitions as well.
Since we are talking about museums in general, we have to talk about the museum, one of the very beautiful museums that I've been to. I don't know whether it is in your domain or not. That is the Museum of Egyptian Contemporary Art in the Opera House premises, and it's beautiful. Yes. It has some of the very most important collections of Mahmoud Said outside the private collections that are spread all over the world. But we have some Mahmoud Said, we have Sabri Raghib, and we have a lot of famous artists' work in the Egyptian Museum of Contemporary Art. And of course Mohammed Mahmoud Khalil Museum across the Nile, which is about almost 1 kilometer away from the Museum of Contemporary Art. Tell us about contemporary art, because we have this museum, we have the Mukhtar Museum, and we have these 3 contemporary art museums, and the beautiful museum on the Nile in Zamalek, that is Aisha Fahmi Museum. And it shows a lot of periodical exhibitions. So tell us about this type of museums, because as we go all over the world, we like always to see contemporary art. And you will be amazed to find people who have Renoir collections and paintings that belong to Matisse, like Mohammed Mahmoud Khalil, and you can find them in Egypt.
Yes. So the thing that this committee mainly in charge with the museums that under the umbrella of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. The museum that you've kindly mentioned, they belong to the Ministry of Culture. But this is also, we're thinking, just whenever they need, an idea or just a cooperation, we're ready. But we have a lot of work to do, for the museums of the Ministry of Antiquities. But they have their own, the sector in the Ministry of Culture, they are working on, but it's not entrusted to us as a committee. But whenever they ask for something, or we would like to borrow, one of the artifacts matching with the scenario, there is a cooperation. But we're not working.
So, since we have brought up the subject, let's talk about the Islamic Museum in Cairo.
Yes.
And Geir Anderson Museum, and of course the Museum of Tapestry in the Islamic Museum, and the tapestry in Mu'izz al-Din Last Street.
Yeah, now it is changed to the Nemek. The collection moved to the Nemek. It's in the third gallery of the Nemek, because the problem with the textiles museum in Shara al-Mu'izz, the building itself, it's antique, so it was a bit challenging, the storages and the display and the condition, because textiles are very sensitive. So the idea was we transferred all the collection to the storages of the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and we have the third gallery at the Nemek.
Yes.
And it's very also important to mention the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. It's very similar to Kafr al-Sheikh Museum in the number of the local inhabitants. They are also, visiting the museum and curious to learn from the museum, in addition to the official visits and the tourists. So this is also...
We need more we're running out of time, unfortunately, but we need to come again, talk more about Egyptian museums. We have to give at least one episode talking about the Islamic Museum in Cairo, especially after the renovation that was done after the terrorist attack on it. And I believe it's one of the very most beautiful museums in the world.
Yes, and even, we said it was very, a very bad memory what happened to it, but, it proved something very important, that it was restored and all the pieces were renovated and conserved by Egyptian conservators. And this is also was, the bright side of what happened. And now it's one of the very active museum in educational programs, community engagement, capacity building for the staff, and even they are training, people and guides.
Well, really, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but really thank you very much, Professor Mary Misek, Professor of Coptic Art and Archaeology in the Faculty of Tourism and Hotel Management, and the Secretary General of the ICOM Egypt, which is the International Council of Museums of Egypt. Definitely, we are coming out of this with a lot of food for thought and brainstorming that I believe that is conveying a very important message, that Egyptian museums are healthy, wealthy, and they have more time in the future, and please go there and enjoy. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad was at the control. Stay tuned to Radio Cairo for more programs, and looking forward to see you same time, same station next week.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.